Good evening. I'm Richard Guzman, and I'm on the board of the Chicago Literary Hall of Fame. On behalf of Don Evans, our executive founding director, our board of directors, and our president, Amy Danzer, our associate board, and their president, Carrie Muley, I'd like to welcome you here tonight for this great event. I would like to open just with thanks, and that is thanks to our advisory panel, to all of the people that support us and our partner organizations, and to you for being here. There is a little bookmark in your booklet here, and it lists the three purposes of the Chicago Literary Hall of Fame: nurturing our past, celebrating our present, nurturing our future. And each of these culminates in a gathering like this. It's so important for us just to be together to celebrate. So we thank you for being here. We covet your support, no matter how that comes, material, donations, your voice in telling others about us and helping them know what we need. As I said, each of these purposes ends at a gathering like this. And with your help, we can keep these gatherings and everything that go along with them, the booklets, the receptions and things like this, free and open to the public. So we do covet your support. The Chicago Literary Fame is now 14 years old. Don, his wife went. I remember Don calling me in 2009 and proposing the project. And I thought, well, why not? Okay? I thought we already had something like this in Chicago. And so our first purpose is to honor our past by enshrining great writers who have passed on into the Hall of Fame. We know that their works will continue to enrich and challenge our lives forever. And what a first class we had. Gwendolyn Brooks, Lorraine Hansberry, Richard Wright, Studs Terkel, Saul Bellow, and Nelson Algren. I like to say that we have so many great writers in Chicago that Hemingway didn't get in until our third induction ceremony. He had to wait till 2012, to get in. Balanced with our honoring of the past is our nourishing of the future. We're always on the lookout for ways to help our youth not only express themselves, but to embrace the reality that they can be part of Chicago's great cultural tradition and are indeed its future. The highlight of that is the Randall Albers Youth Writing Award. And earlier, youth from all over Chicagoland entered their work. And in another room in the library earlier this year, we gave prizes to the first 4 of our finalists, and we honored 10 honorable mentions as well. And then the 4 prize winners read their work, and they just caused a stir. I just heard whispers everywhere saying things like, "Could you have written that when you were 14? Could you have written that when you were 16? And we left with that rare gift. We actually felt good about the future. And so that brings us to tonight, the Henry Blake Fuller Award for Lifetime Achievement. Tonight, Scott Turow becomes the 15th recipient of that award, joining people like Haki Madhubuti, Sandra Cisneros, Ana Castillo, Stuart Dybeck, Angela Jackson. All of these people are mentioned in your program. And I just wanted to say, just on a personal note to Scott, that, Scott, you're a beautiful writer, and you give us plots that twist and turn like few plots twist and turn. And behind your skill as a writer, I've always thought that breathing behind all is your abiding concern for what one of your greatest characters defined as the ordinary privileges of a decent life: common trust, personal respect, and even liberty. So thank you, Scott, for being the reason that we can all be together this evening. Now it's my pleasure to introduce two people who are legends in their own right, but whose personal and business relationship and their relationship as life partners has got to be going on 50 years now. Donna LaPietra has exerted profound influence on many Chicago institutions, including this library, Millennium Park and the Millennium Park Foundation. She was a producer of Siskel and Ebert at the movies and also produced what many consider one of the greatest newscasts in American history, CBS 2, with Bill Curtis and Walter Jacobson. Bill Curtis, of course, is a legendary newsman, and he continues a vast media presence, ranging from the wonderful and important documentaries that come out of his Curtis Productions company to his being the voice of NPR's very popular Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. It's my pleasure to bring on stage to make the case for Scott Turow, Donna LaPietra, and Bill Curtis.
I see you, Scott. Bill, why don't you start us off?
Oh, I will. Donna and I are sure that you came here with the confidence that the case for Scott Turow has already been successfully made, and that a jury of your peers has determined that you would, in about half an hour from now, receive the coveted Fuller Award. But with the law being what it is, until the final gavel falls, it seems that there could be room for counterclaims and challenges.
And so, to thwart any such Cook or Kendall County hijinks, the Chicago Literary Hall of Fame has wisely paneled 6 of us as expert witnesses to testify in your behalf tonight. And Bill, you will be our leadoff witness.
When I first met Scott, I was struck by certain characteristics that we had in common. We both went to law school, passed the bar. He joined the U.S. Attorney's Office in Chicago. I started covering trials of the century for CBS News. We both discovered a passion early in our lives. Call it a talent, which was quite an advantage. He liked to write. If we could only find some of those early English class essays. It was the kind of talent that brought a warm feeling when he thought of a special expression, a comfortable friend that lingered just over his shoulder and didn't go away. In those early years, he didn't quite know how it would show itself later in life when he grew up. Being a writer didn't come with a pension and retirement package. He sought to hone his craft at a Stanford Creative Writing Center, but perhaps like every other student in college, he realized that style was not enough. He had to have something to say, and he was persuaded to go to law school, the law school where the diploma is engraved in gold, especially if you're cum laude, Harvard. Like most law students, after spending 3 years studying torts, contracts, and shepherdizing 500 years of English common law, he passed the bar, which led to an active legal career of headline cases. One of them helped earn freedom for a man wrongfully accused, having spent 11 years behind bars. In his book, Ultimate Punishment, Scott takes us through his own ultimate decision to oppose the death penalty. I also wrote a book advocating the abolition of capital punishment. Scott's generous back cover blurb for mine likely garnered more attention than the book. Meanwhile, and fittingly, the most noted legal scholar in America, Lawrence Tribe, reviewed Scott's. He called Ultimate Punishment the ultimate statement about the death penalty. Quote, "To read it is to understand why law alone cannot make us whole." That could be applied to each of Scott's books that educate the reader about the often mysterious and misunderstood basis of our social contract. Scott's legacy will be to use the story form to explain it to the rest of us. The law was a noble goal, but most important, the experience was filled with source material for a writing career. The law, and what a career. He was proud of his legal achievements, but he had found what he really loved, the essence of that first essay written in high school that gave him a tingle. And so began the modern history of the most famous and legal and best. So began the modern history of the most famous and best legal novelist of our lifetime. It's my honor to offer my argument in the case to award Scott Turow the Fuller Award for Life Achievement. And let me turn it back now to my wife, Donna.
Well, I'm delighted to appear as a character witness and to have the opportunity to share with you some important lessons that I have learned from being around Scott Turow that demonstrate why he should indeed be honored with the award this evening. Scott Turow lesson number 1, invest all the time you've been given to your passions. After all, it is astonishing what you can accomplish while commuting by train. You might end up writing the first of many best-selling novels to follow. Lesson number 2, know that in the worst of times and situations, you can find the most extraordinary, ordinary heroes. Using this title, I think of the support that Scott continually offers to support the librarians that are our city's everyday heroes, particularly on the front lines of today's culture wars. They protect and defend all writers. That errors are reversible, not only your own, but others. Approach life with a charitable heart. Scott has done so in his legal and writing careers, handling a full measure of pro bono cases, has served on state reform commissions, president of the Authors Guild, and active in Literacy Chicago. The next lesson, that being a rock-bottom remainder actually can be much better than it sounds. Just have a look here at this photo. I know you're looking for where Scott is there in the front row. And I think he's next to Amy Tan, if I'm correct. Is that? Yes, with the wig. Well, Bill, wearing your wig. It looks very, I can't wait to see it on you. Bill, I know that your own rock-bottom remainder books in our basement at home don't have anything like this vibe. Now, can you imagine instead that you could be rocking out in a basement band with other best-selling authors and then touring and raising $2 million in the process? How fabulous. It brings me to another lesson. Scott has demonstrated that in life, you should always have one L of a time. And this one, if you're in, be all in. When you say, yes, I will, or count me in, commit your body and soul. If you agree, as Scott did for me, not once but 3 times, to be a judge for a small nonprofit fundraising spelling bee, you come prepared with a rule book, you allow no cheating, you bring a stopwatch and a score pad, and you be ready to be the best goddamn judge of all time. Or if you agree to interview Henry Kissinger for the Holocaust Museum's annual dinner, make sure your background research notes are almost as big as one of Kissinger's books. As you can see there, he was carrying, that's what he brought to the dinner that night. And the final Scott lesson that I offer, that it come in his own words, quote, the law, for all its failings, has a noble goal, to make the little bit of life that people can actually control more just and reflect our best version of ourselves. For helping to ensure that there are indeed more opportunities for more people to have that control, through his words and actions, I'm honored to stand in testimony to Scott Turow, Chicago's legendary author, civic leader, and I can testify, a true friend. I rest my case. And now, Bill, with our closing argument, using the lowest form of writing, but still held in high regard. And wait, don't tell me. I'm going to ask you to deliver, please, a limerick.
The case for Scott Turow. There is a best-selling writer named Scott who could never be replaced by a bot. He has a crafty way with words, a code not easily broken by nerds. Only he can weave such a twisted plot, proving time and again that crime can pay when writing about those lords of gray. 40 million copies sold, turning into solid gold. Scott has writing magic in his DNA.
And I know that you all have these incredible program books, and they describe all the speakers tonight, so we're just going to have some short introductions, but I also commend this book to you. It literally is a book. I learned things about Scott Turow I had no idea. All good things, by the way. Well, almost all good things. It is really wonderfully put together, and I attend a lot of events. I have rarely seen something done this well, so I commend the book of your program tonight to you as I now please welcome our next witness. She is Oprah approved and a literary award-winning and best-selling author herself, Jane Hamilton. It's a little dark back there, Jane.
I got it.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Wow, and we got a limerick too. It's great to be here. Thank you for providing the occasion. So, Arthur Miller once said that a writer is bound to reveal himself, even if at the time of the writing or publication he doesn't know what he's revealing, which is an occupational hazard. What do we know about the writer that he may not know about himself? Having been immersed in Scotland, primarily in Kendall County, that endlessly fascinating toilet bowl of a county, what does Scott reveal? It's safe to say that he knows pretty much everything about pretty much everything. This isn't hyperbole. Of course, he intimately knows the courts of law, the tools of spycraft, and the institutions by which our world operates, but also, to name but a few knowledge pockets, music of all kinds, the minutiae of architecture, scrapyards, the airline industry, gadgets galore, carpet fibers, World War II in various dimensions, real estate, strawberry picking, wardrobe choices, the armor with which his characters try to shield themselves, and what the cut of their suits mean. His ear is as exquisitely tuned as his eye is all-seeing. He knows how people speak. For our delectation, he understands the weaponry required in the private country of marriage. He delivers unto us the undercurrents of personal enmity and affection in the corridors of law that affect how justice is dispensed. I leave it to you, dear reader, to revel in what Scott understands about how sexual congress both obliterates the self and lifts it up. There is a theme in Scotland that reoccurs. If you are lucky enough to do batshit crazy calisthenics in the name of sex or love, and lucky enough never to be shamed, indicted, or imprisoned, you are indeed fortunate. If you're not lucky, well, therein lies a novel. In sum, the gear and tackle and trim of the trades are on display in the novels, in service to the work. As much as Scott knows, there's no excess, there's no writerly smarty pants lurking, showing off, all things in service to the work. What fuels Scott? I'm guessing that Scott and Sandy Stern, Sandy, that magnificent and beloved creation, share at least some of the same interests. Scott writes in The Last Trial, although Stern generally avoids confessing the fact, he has long accepted privately that in many ways he has enjoyed spending his adult life among criminals. He has developed an aesthete's appreciation for the knavishness, the guile, the selfish cleverness of so many of his clients, appreciating human misbehavior for its miserable creativity. Sandy's thoughts are augmented by the Dickensian lilt and humor of Scott's sentences. It's become precious and old-fashioned in some circles to talk about the beauty and meaning and clarity in a turn of phrase, that particular joy of writing and reading. I'd wager that in addition to the work of making his intricate plots, keeping a step ahead of the reader, and delivering the truth of his characters, the making of sentences is one of the reasons that Scott is having so much fun, the enjoyment which radiates to the reader. It's not only playing with his imaginary friends, as he has said about going to work, but the happiness of getting the sentences down right. About Tommy Molto, Scott writes, Tommy's recent good fortune had done little to rescue him from his lifetime standing among the physically unblessed. Do people say how funny Scott is? Not enough. Scott, you are so funny, and you are a freak of nature. You're supposed to be failing at least a little bit now, but no, at this late date, you bring out Pinky. Surely it's a risk to write from the point of view of Sandy's granddaughter, but Pinky is another magnificent character, flawed, striving, clear-sighted, muddle-headed, sexually adventurous for better and for worse, and tattooed up the wazoo. The Scotties, for that's what we are, like the Swifties, but we chant, Pinky, 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 more Pinky, Pinky forever. I want to almost close with a remarkable tiny little touch which might not seem like much, but it's the last twirl of the frosting in this scene, wherein Donatella is about to tell Sandy something very private. Scott writes, Donatella again eyes the spoon, turning it over in her knotted fingers, while a smile forms, a rare moment in which she exhibits deep appreciation for herself. The heat in the house comes on, adding a whisper behind them that further conceals Donatella's lowered voice. When I read that line about the furnace coming on, I stopped cold. Damn, Scott, that smallest bit of real life that makes art. Was it just there for Scott, or did he think, I need some background noise? I'm guessing he was several places at once, way up in the airstream, sailing along, and the great writer firmly in his chair at work, and he is fully in the scene so that the whisper of the furnace is simply there. What comes through to me most of all in Scotland, a place of human fragility and greed and brutality, a place where a lesser writer might succumb to cynicism, but in Scott's world, hope is available. He writes with a lyrical tenderness about deepest sorrows, because I think what's revealed in the novels, as much as anything else about Scott's brilliance, is his tender heart, his striving to protect an essential tenderness in the cruel world. I suspect he knows that about his work, and I hope that what he also knows is how much his novels have buoyed us up through the decades, even as they've kept us up long into the night. What I trust he knows, and tonight is an attempt to express this, is how much we love him. Thank you.
You may have seen him just come out here, but he is a comedian, an actor, an interviewer, a writer. Real reason I'm here is that he is a Burning Man survivor. Aaron Freeman.
This is how I always start. I'm the prosecutor. I represent the state. I'm here to present to you evidence of a crime. Together, you will weigh the evidence, you will deliberate it, you will decide if it proves the defendant's guilt. This man, and here I point. You must always point, Rusty. I was told by John White. That was the day I started within the office. The sheriff took my fingerprints, the chief judge swore me in, and John White brought me up to watch the first jury trial I had ever seen. Ned Halsey was making the opening statement for the state. As he gestured across the courtroom, John, in his generous, avuncular way, with a humid scent of alcohol on his breath at 10 in the morning, whispered my initial lesson. He was the chief deputy DA, PA, then a hale Irishman with white hair as wild as corn silk. It was almost a dozen years ago, long before I had formed even the most secret ambition to hold John's job myself. If you don't have the courage to point, John White whispered, you can't expect them to have the courage to convict. And so I point. I extend my hand across the courtroom. I hold one finger straight. I seek the defendant's eye, and I say, this man has been accused. He turns away. He blinks, or shows nothing at all. So I point. I extend my hands. In the beginning, I was often preoccupied, imagining how it would feel to sit there, held in the focus of scrutiny, denounced before all who cared to listen, knowing that the most ordinary privileges of a decent life, common trust, personal respect, even liberty, were now like some cloak you checked at the door and might never retrieve. I could feel the fear, the hot frustration, the haunted separateness. Now, like ore deposits, the harder stuff of duty and obligation have settled in the veins where those softer feelings moved. I have a job to do. It's not that I've grown uncaring, believe me, but this business of accusing, judging, punishing has gone on always. It is one of the great wheels turning beneath everything we do. I play my part. I'm a functionary of our only universally recognized system of telling wrong from right, a bureaucrat of good and evil. This must be prohibited, not that. One would expect that after all these years of making charges, trying cases, watching defendants come and go, it might have all become a jumble. Somehow it has not. Today, I've turned back to the jury. Today, all of you have taken on one of the most solemn obligations of citizenship. Your job is to find the facts, the truth. It is not an easy task. I know. Memories may fail, recollections may be shaded, the evidence might point in differing directions. You may be forced to decide about things that no one seems to know or be willing to say. If you were at home, at work, anywhere in your daily life, you might be ready to throw up your hands. You might not want to make the effort. Here, you must. You must, let me remind you, there was a real crime. No one will dispute that. There was a real victim, real pain. You do not have to tell us why it happened. People's motives, after all, may be forever locked inside them. But you must at least try to determine what actually occurred. If you cannot, we will not know if this man deserves to be free or punished. We will have no idea who to blame. If we cannot find the truth, what is our hope of justice?
Thank you, Aaron. And now, a woman who continues her lifelong fight for fairness and equality, freedom of expression, and against censorship. Please welcome a woman I greatly admire, Christy Hefner.
A few years ago, I was asked to interview Scott for an event for Phi Beta Kappa. It wasn't a surprise to learn that he was a member of an association dedicated to excellence in the liberal arts and sciences, because all of us who know Scott know he's damn smart. But in thinking about tonight's event and the kind invitation to be part of this parade of celebrants, I found myself thinking more about Scott's EQ rather than his IQ. I think what especially drew me to that was the core component of EQ that is empathy. That's the ability to see and even feel another person's perspective. I believe it's key to Scott's extraordinary success both as a lawyer and as a writer. It's a different kind of key, of course, to the one that Phi Beta Kappa gives you. But I believe empathy is key to how Scott went from, in his words, a death sentence agnostic to a fierce advocate for its abolishment. I think it's key to why he is such a strong and effective representative of the wrongfully convicted. And I think it's key to his creative and commercial success because as a writer, what he is able to do is to create fully formed characters, very different from himself. Most recently, as Jane mentioned, to the fleshing out of this marvelous heroine, Pinky. I want to particularly call this out this evening because we're living in a time when seeing a different point of view seems to be a rarity. A time when increasingly people seem only to want, indeed to seek out affirmations of what they already believe. A time when many people's instinct across the political spectrum is not to engage with or learn from or even seek to understand ideas that don't fit their own. So just as Phi Beta Kappa represents on campuses a devotion to free inquiry, intellectual diversity, and civil discourse, people like Scott represent those values in a broader society. Consequently, while tonight he is the recipient of this prestigious award, we are the beneficiaries of his gift of empathy. Thank you, Scott.
Our final witness is a Pulitzer Prize winner for her editorials that led to sweeping reforms in Illinois' justice system, Cornelia Grumman.
So I am honored to add a few words about how Illinois and the nation benefited enormously from Scott's attention, writings, and influence around the issue of capital punishment. In the 1990s, Scott worked on 2 death penalty cases of note, Alejandro Hernandez in DuPage County and later Christopher Thomas in Lake County. Of those experiences, Scott later wrote that the Hernandez case demonstrated to him the risks to the innocent, while the Thomas case illuminated the problematic nature of who among the guilty gets selected for execution. Those 2 cases alone were fraught with many of the system fractures that would, in just a few years, suddenly draw more widespread public scrutiny and debate. Among those fractures that Scott saw early and firsthand, erroneous eyewitness identifications, false confessions, unreliable jailhouse snitch testimony, prosecutorial misconduct, trial judge errors, and random application of death sentences by race and geography. Not long after Scott's successful release of Alex Hernandez in 1997, I was working as a state beat reporter for the Chicago Tribune and pitched my editor coverage of an upcoming double execution in Stateville Prison, which would have been the 9th and the 10th execution since reinstatement of the death penalty in Illinois in 1977. As a barometer of the minimal interest at the time around capital punishment, my very short story, or what ended up being a very short story, ran far inside the metro section opposite the horoscopes. Scott's pro bono experiences informed his contributions as a member of Governor George Ryan's 14-member Commission on Capital Punishment, announced just months after Ryan declared a moratorium on executions in Illinois in early 2000. The Commission's charge to determine what system changes were necessary in order to make application of the death penalty in Illinois fair, just, and acceptable. This came at a singular moment in history with a remarkable and rapid confluence of factors that ultimately led not only to sweeping legislative reforms to the criminal justice system, an abolishment ultimately of the death penalty in Illinois, but a ripple effect across the nation. Commission colleagues remarked that Scott pulled more than his share of the weight, reading every word of the weekly readings distributed to them, ordering up research and more data, and becoming near obsessed around the question of whether the death penalty deterred murders. His fellow commission members marveled at how Scott always seemed to be tapping away at his tiny computer, which they all assumed would be fodder for a forthcoming novel. Former Lake County prosecutor and commission member Mike Waller said to me for a profile of Scott I wrote for the Chicago Tribune magazine, "I read all his novels and I thought, this is great. After that experience, he's going to write about some dunderheaded prosecutor named Walker." Scott explained at the time that he took so many notes because he used writing to think through complex arguments. Despite the seriousness of the Commission's charge, Scott provided compatriots with moments of inadvertent levity. Scott would inject words like horatory into his comments, rendering the room silent because nobody knew what the word meant. Later, members would make a point of incorporating horatory into their own comments to see if Scott noticed, or else dug up their own SAT words and styled their comments in future conversations around words like precatory, paying attention to whether Scott tracked the joke. Between Illinois' ignominious track record of sending 13 wrongfully convicted men to death row, Tribune investigations, the moratorium on executions, advances in DNA technology, and the work of Northwestern's Center on Wrongful Convictions, once the Commission recommendations came out in April 2002, they provided focus and rocket fuel to the debate over reforms. Scott personally turbocharged those recommendations with subsequent writings, debates, and testimony, including at state and congressional hearings. John Cullerton, then head of the Senate Judiciary Committee in Illinois, compares Scott's appearance to discuss the commission findings as the equivalent in terms of celebrity razzle-dazzle in Springfield as Bo Derek's appearance there to advocate against the killing of wild horses for human consumption. If Bo Derek was a 10, Cullerton said to me recently, Scott was a solid 9.5. From his commission involvement, Scott produced Ultimate Punishment, which compellingly shares Scott's personal evolution from death penalty agnostic to death penalty opponent. Around the time Ultimate Punishment came out in 2003, I happened to be pregnant with my first child. Given my own intensive focus on the death penalty and issues of criminal justice reform while on the Tribune's editorial board by this point, I could not imagine a book I would be more excited to read. I stuffed it into my hospital go bag, confident that Scott's characteristic page-turning prose would be powerful enough to distract me from the matters at hand when the time came. I was already 10 days overdue, however, so keeping Scott in the hospital go bag required an act of incredible self-discipline on my part. Given the 18 hours of induced labor that followed, the restraint paid off. I continually ordered my poor husband, Jim Warren, to keep reading throughout, as Scott's wisdom, incisiveness, and narrative grace became my inadvertent doula. Scott delivered, and ultimately, so did I.
Well, with that, I think it's time that we close this case for Scott Turow. I've polled the jury, and let me just tell you that, Scott, you got a perfect 10 with this group. And it is time for us, in fact, to bestow the Fuller Award for Lifetime Achievement on you. Scott Turow, if you could join us on stage, and Richard Guzman, please.
I told Scott earlier that the last time we met, he greeted me with, "Hi, how's Rick?" And Rick's my son here, who I brought along to actually present the award to Scott. He's the executive director of a great organization called the Neighbor Project. Rick?
Well, I feel like perhaps it should be someone like our great Attorney General, Kwame Raoul, or someone who should be presenting here, but it's my great privilege to be able to just quickly share. When I first met Scott Turow as just a 22 or 23-year-old kid right out of college, I was a staffer on that for the Capital Punishment Commission. And so I got to be an eyewitness in those rooms. I can attest that Scott was the hardest worker, but what really impressed me in that process was that not only was he, of course, the best writer in the room and nominated to actually draft the preamble and the summation of the commission's work, but that he was determined for the words to not simply be his own. He was determined to make sure that he was representing each perspective there, and that while I was a mere staffer, young, and not part of the deliberations, Scott would ask me my opinion after the meetings. He would let me offer some of my own research that I had found. I was an opponent of the death penalty. He let me lobby him a little bit on that, and then surprised me with an acknowledgement in his book, Ultimate Punishment. I've read almost everything you've ever published, Scott, but the one thing I've always been most curious about, and I haven't been able to read, was the letter of recommendation that you offered to write for me when I applied to law school. Law schools are very strict about this. You write the letter, you put it in a sealed envelope, and sign across the back of the seal to make sure that people like me don't tamper with those things. Later, Scott simply told me that he wrote a letter that would make me blush. I always remember, and I've still never gotten my hands on that letter, but I can tell you the blood certainly did rush to my head when I opened not only a law school letter of acceptance, but one that also came with a full tuition scholarship. So Scott, I am, again, deeply honored and privileged to take part in this presentation and to offer this award to you, not only for your extraordinary literary contributions, but for your extraordinary contributions to humanity, to justice, and for being one of the just great human beings that our community has to offer. Congratulations, this is so very well deserved.
Well, thank you very much, both of the Richard Guzmans next to me. I sometimes joke that the parents, as the parents of an adult child, you should master only 2 words: I approve. And in thinking about what I should say tonight, it's the same thing, 2 words, but thank you. Everything I'm going to say, and I hope I don't say it for too long, is an elaboration on that theme. I do have to admit that, grateful as I am, I cannot help recognizing that this award comes with certain omens attached. Generally speaking, Lifetime Achievement Awards are not given to the young. And I have to accept the fact that there is less to look forward to than there is to look back on. But you can only say, so be it. And again, thank you. Gratitude for the life that I've been privileged to live is balm for the wound of aging. Although Adrian and I often live elsewhere these days, I will always be a Chicagoan in my soul. This complex, frustrating, amazing city is a presence in almost everything I've written, and I especially appreciate that tonight's award is made in the name of a Chicago organization. On the other hand, I also have in mind the saying that a prophet is without honor in his own land, which, when you really think about the words, means that if I was really such a hotshot, none of you would be here. So, but you are here, and I am intensely grateful to every person in this auditorium. You honor me enormously with your presence, with your friendship, readership, your attention. You truly fill my heart, each one of you. Some of you, as I look out, I know well, and have come into my life from multiple different roads, the practice of law, childhood, the literary world, the golf course. But thank you all, every one of you, for being here. Special thanks, of course, in no particular order, but of course, I guess this is in a particular order. First to Adrian, whose love has nourished me in a way that I always longed for. Second, to the family members who made this special journey to be here. My son and my granddaughter. It was the nicest way imaginable to start the day, Zadie, with you crawling into our bed this morning. It was definitely a great day. My first cousin and his wonderful wife who are here from Atlanta. Dan has always been more a brother to me than a cousin, and I love both of you. Thank you for being here. Thanks also to my stepdaughters who are present in the front row. I need to thank the library. Thank you, Mary Ellen. Thank you, Donna and Bill, for being, as you always are. Adrian calls Bill the voice of Chicago, and I think it's particularly fitting because, and I'm sure many of us have actually heard Bill's voice in our dreams. And Donna has orchestrated so many public events in this city that I truly believe that checking her availability is the first step in planning those kinds of occasions. I'm going to talk to Liz Taylor, as I understand, in a few minutes, who was so thorough, so penetrating that she was scraping around yesterday trying to find something she'd written when we first met more than 30 years ago. And whose own contributions to the literary culture of this society, of this city, have been extraordinary through her own work and editorship. I have to thank all of tonight's speakers. First, two notes, really. One, wow. Two, I owe you all. Thank you for doing this. Aaron, Christy, Cornelia, Jane, Richard, and Rick. Many of you have been my boon companions along the way, truly dear friends. But your art, your skills, your commitments have been a gift, certainly not just to me, but to this entire community. There are plenty of others who I need to thank for their help along the way. My ex, Annette, gave me a helpful nudge at critical moments in my writing career. My colleagues at the former Sonnenschein firm made it possible for me for 30 to 35 years do what most people had told me what was impossible, namely to both write and to practice law. I've had great editors, John Galassi, Deb Futter, Ben Sevier, and I had wonderful mentors when I was coming up, Tilly Olson, Leo Marks, David Sofield, Nancy Packer, Wallace Stegner, to name just some of them. I also have to mention Don Evans, the founding executive director of the Chicago Literary Hall of Fame. The very name of the organization, Hall of Fame, of course, is silent acknowledgement of Don's passion for baseball, which is something that we share. And when I think about Don, I always recall one of the very best baseball novels, Shoeless Joe, by the Canadian writer W.P. Kinsella, which became the basis for the movie Field of Dreams. But it, many people remember the repeated and resonant line, if you build it, they will come. And this organization is basically a tribute to that line. It's the product of Don's vision and his commitment, his energy, and it's an incredibly comforting reminder in this world, which is dominated by larger and larger bureaucracies and raw expressions of corporate will, that notwithstanding all of that, a single person with will and charm and energy can work to significantly better our lives in the way that Don has. I have lived a blessed life in almost every way imaginable, certainly as a writer and a lawyer, and in the role that I most wanted to succeed, namely as a parent. And I am cognizant of that blessing every single day. I started out as the child of an affluent household with advantages that most Americans never get, and I also enjoyed what Selma Freyberg called every child's birthright, meaning a loving mother whose concern for me I felt constantly in every fiber and molecule of my body. There were challenges in my household like everybody else's, but I have to say in my own behalf that at least I didn't completely squander the head start that I had in life. Over the years, I've told many younger people who ask for my views that I've concluded that success in the arts depends on 4 factors. Talent and hard work, of course, are good places to start, but the most important ingredient of all is luck. Over the years, and especially the years I spent at the Creative Writing Center at Stanford, where I was for 5 years, I've shared the company of and marveled at the talents of many truly gifted and even great writers, and they never ended up getting the audience that they deserved. And that happened for many reasons, all of them pretty much the work of fortune, people who were waylaid by drugs or alcohol, disastrous personal relationships, bad health outcomes. But at the end of the day, they simply didn't have the luck that I had of being in the right place and the right time, which of course was writing about the law and legal settings at a time when Americans began to have a profound curiosity about that subject. The last, and in my view, final factor that I cite as essential to making it in the arts is perseverance, which I sometimes refer to as the ability to take a punch or to get up after being knocked down. I had rejection slips enough to paper the walls of the places I had lived in by the time Presumed Innocent was published. But the one thing that kept me going through the years, writing on the morning commuter train and writing in my basement, was that unlike some other authors, I love the process. It is true that I tell Adrian every morning I am now going upstairs to play with my imaginary friends. And that really has been my life, the joy of that kind of play, which I was reminded of just this afternoon when I was watching 3 of my granddaughters romp around the house, creating a better life for a series of stuffed animals. And it has been my blessing to experience some of that state of play, not every day, of course not every day, but often throughout my adult life. When I was 10 years old, I announced, and I saw from one of the quotes above, I've sometimes said 11, but I'll say 10. I announced that I was going to be a novelist, and that was an ambition I had borrowed from my mother, who for many reasons never got very far in fulfilling it. And what propelled this declaration was my having read The Count of Monte Cristo during one of my malingering absences from school. My mom, a former teacher, tolerated this so long as she thought I was doing something worthwhile, and she handed me The Count of Monte Cristo, and I came away thrilled, thinking that if it was that enlivening, that thrilling to read the book, imagine how much more exciting it must have been to have written it. And over the years, I have found myself flabbergasted when I think back to realize that I have lived my life under the guidance of a 10-year-old. And it's even more remarkable to me that after many years, it turned out that the 10-year-old was right. I stand before you, one of the very few human beings that you will meet who can declare full-throatedly that my dreams came true. And I bear testimony to luck and fate and dozens of other human beings whose help has brought me here. And I say that with deep gratitude again to all of you who are being here tonight. Thank you, and thank you so much for this.
We end the evening with a conversation with Liz Taylor. So could Liz come up? There are very few people that have the knowledge and range that Liz does. And so we look forward to a great conversation. Liz?
Scott, I'm going to ask you a question that no man likes to be asked. Do you remember meeting me?
I confess that,
It's okay.
well, the answer is no, but the circumstances were extraordinary enough that I forgive myself.
Well, yes, because I had just moved to Chicago, kicking and screaming, and Time magazine said, well, there's this lawyer, and he's written this book, and here's the galley, and it's supposed to be really good, you know, and I'm like, well, you know, and you should go see him in his law office. And that's how I met you. And I'm like, as I read the novel, first of all, they said it was a mystery. Then they said it was a thriller. And actually, even at that time, I was thinking, this is neither. This is like a psychological portrait. It's not a genre novel. And it also, there's a lot of gynecology involved. So anyway, and you said about making your own luck. So what you told me was that you had a lot of offers for presumed innocent.
Yeah.
But you made a fateful decision. Do you remember what it was? It was.
Well, I remember what the decision was,
Yeah.
but I'm not, of course, with a flawed memory. I'm not sure how I explained it to you.
No, anyway, no, but you smartly said you wanted to write. I mean, now I understand that you wanted to write for books that, as you put it someplace, that bus writers
Yes.
could read, and also English professors
Right.
could read. And it was very smart. I mean, you make your own luck, but you chose to go to Farrar, Straus Giroux, which was an extraordinary publishing house with this amazing reputation, and that really sort of established you in a certain lane. That was very smart. Do you remember?
You know, I
making that decision?
gave Annette credit before, my ex-wife, and that was one of those moments where she gave me an important nudge. She looked at me and said, as long as I have known you, you had a dream. Why not have all of it? And I was, you know, a slavish admirer of Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. Loved virtually everything they published, and it was such an honor to think of myself as being on that list that, you know, and I just left the U.S. Attorney's Office. It certainly didn't make any sense to me to make that decision based on money. And, you know, because I was in private practice and I was making a lot more money than I had as a public servant. So, you know, why do it on that basis? I just did it because that's where I most wanted to be published.
Yeah, I mean, so I think you made your luck. I think, I mean, and you had these amazing mentors, but I think Tilly Olson, can you talk a little bit about Tilly Olson, and who sort of, in many ways, is your sort of, I think, literary mother.
Yes.
But then you also have a sort of strange literary father,
Yeah,
right?
yes, but that's...
Saul Bellow.
Yeah, those are...
What-
Tilly, my relationship with Tilly, it was real. My relationship with Bellow was largely in my head. But Tilly was hired as the writer-in-residence at Amherst in my senior year, and she became... I was freed from classes. There were pretty loose times in the at the end of the 1960s, so the idea that, you'd be a student and not go to class was not that exceptional. And so Tilly was my tutor, and she helped organize my reading and my writing. And, she was a wonderfully unconventional person.
Yes.
With her own, she was a self-declared revolutionary, a communist, and intense feminist, who introduced me to a number of works which are now regarded as, staples of feminist literature, but which I had, never heard of before, Life in the Iron Mills or The Yellow Wallpaper, things like that. I was amazed by her and also enthralled by her writing. She is truly one of the great American writers of the 20th century. It's a very small body of work, but each work, and they're all works of short fiction, basically, they're like a many-faceted diamond.
Yeah, and I think your first novel, right, was about a rent strike.
Yes, it wasn't my first novel.
Okay.
It was one of my early unpublished novels. It was actually my last, no, it wasn't even that. I was going to say my last unpublished novel, but no, that's not true
It
either.
just made sense for the communists to,
Yeah.
speak against the man.
Yeah, well, I was my own kind of 60s kid, so.
And then talk about Bellow.
Oh, Bellow. Well, for some reason, I regarded, Saul Bellow as this figure of idolatry. And, I was a Chicagoan. He was generally hailed during those years as the greatest living American novelist. But there was some resonance to that inside my house. And so I paid enormous attention to him. I loved his books. I tried in the way of AI to sort of scrape his books and internalize all of it. And one of the great compliments that I ever had was when the English novelist Carrie Harrison, who was Rex Harrison's son, wrote to me and said, I see the influence of Bellow in The Burden of Proof. And I was thrilled, absolutely thrilled that somebody noticed it. But while I'd been at Stanford, I wrote Bellow this letter that included a phrase that I stole from my uncle, the psychoanalyst, that, I knew he had a warm Jewish heart. And somehow, at the time, I thought what Bellow was responding to was that phrase, because he wrote me back, which was astonishing. And I had many glancing encounters with him over the years. And, he wrote me a very nice note about Presumed Innocent and a not so nice note about The Burden of Proof.
Right. Who would offer there if they don't like it?
Yeah, why bother to write to tell me I didn't like that book?
Right.
I don't know.
You're right. Let's get the uncle.
I don't know. And, I ultimately...
Hostile.
I still think, I still worship his novels, but when I was ultimately, Jim Atlas, his biographer, said, come on, I'll bring you down. I want to introduce you to Saul. I said, no, I'm not going to do it. And I was standoffish for reasons that I didn't fully understand until after Bellow died. And all of a sudden, then I put two and two together, and only then, remembered that Bellow and my dad had gone to high school together. Right. And they were not, I don't think they were exactly in the same circles, although J. Sidney Harris, who worked for the Daily News, had been a friend of Bellows and also a friend of my father. So they probably had some contact with each other. And the fact of the matter is he probably answered my letter years before because he recognized the last name. But
Didn't they both change their?
yes, they both. Yeah, my dad, and this just tells you a lot about my father. When Bello was at the very zenith of his renown, my dad would go humrumping around the house, Solomon Bellows, correcting him for having changed his name. And of course, only years later did I find that my father had graduated from high school known as David Turow. So, but it was that's very typical of my dad that only the other guy could commit a sin.
Well, you said that your father, the Rosetta Stone.
Yes, I did view Bello. I didn't. This wasn't conscious. I mean, I do believe a lot in, the unconscious mind and the way we hide things from ourselves. But clearly, Bello, besides being a truly great novelist, had incredible significance to me because I guess I thought that if I could somehow internalize and understand Bello, I would be able to better understand my dad, who was, one of the great challenges in my life. He was a fine doctor, beloved of his patients, but, like a lot of people, he left the best of himself at work.
Yeah. What can
That's
I
a
say?
meaningful look.
No, well, I'm tempted to turn to your beloved editor, the amazing Jonathan Galassi.
Yes.
Do you know this line he says?
No.
He says his father was a gynecologist. You have to remember. Certainly, sex is at the core of his novels.
True enough.
I would say character is at the core of your novels.
We can blame my psychoanalyst uncle for some of this too, but
Nobody will have to go on the couch here, but but character. In the nitty-gritty of writing your novels, it seems that character comes first, right?
yes, of course. I mean, it comes first because, to me, the job of a novel is to create a coherent, imagined world. And generally, the captain of the ship that you're going to sail on as you enter that world is the protagonist or several characters. And if the characters aren't believable and deep, if they don't interest you, then that world is going to fail by definition.
Right. Well, they also have to have empathy for them and also kind of imagine how they would act. But, your plots are really kind of delicate and detailed, but it's interesting that doesn't come first for you.
Well, I think character and plot, although, if you go to Bello, and there was a time in the mid-century, 20th century American novel where, character was everything and plot was a second thought. And I've always believed that character and plot in some ways are one and the same. And that if a book is well plotted, then the events, even the surprises, will be illuminating of the character, of the main character.
And so in the writing process, we heard about the train. So what's it like? I mean, do you still write on pieces of paper?
No. And I did write on the morning commuter train, sometimes using my oldest daughter Rachel's discarded school notebooks. But early on, I bought one of the first portable computers, which weighed a mere 40 pounds. I bought it used, took it down in the basement in the house we were then living in Wilmette, and typed into it everything I'd written on the morning train during a period of almost 3 weeks away from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Once I figured out what that computer could do, I knew it was going to basically save my life as a writer, because it meant that since my time to write was so isolated that I didn't have to follow along sequentially. I could just write what inspired me that day, very often based on something that had happened in court the day before, or an exchange between colleagues, or the hurt feelings expressed in the hallway between lovers. I mean, so I could capture all of that without worrying about the particular order, because the computer would help me make a coherent whole out of it eventually.
So interesting. And so it's interesting because the plots are so intricate, and when most people describe your novels, they sort of describe the plot.
Right, but the intricacy of the plots to a very great extent has to do with the need to tie all of those disparate elements together.
Exactly.
And so I've got these things that I've written that I think are, highly resonant to me, and I don't want to discard them. So it's like, well, how do I get from that island to this, this peeled, paint peeled front door? And it's like, well, there's got to be a way to do this, and I'm going to figure it out.
That's great. So, in the writing, Kendall County.
Mm-hmm.
So, model on Suffolk County a little.
Well,
worked a little bit.
When I had various experiences when 1L, my nonfiction book about law school, was published, which convinced me that I had, sort of dodged a bullet, and then when I went back to writing fiction, it was not going to be a roman à clough. People were not going to be able to figure out who was who, which of course had been the case with 1L. So I went back to a case that I had seen when I was working as an intern, a clerk in the Suffolk County DA's office. And originally I thought I was writing about Boston, but I was writing, slowly, just, half an hour every day on the commuter train, an hour at night, usually on Sunday night. So, and I don't keep a diary, so the place I was writing about began to look more and more like Chicago, but of the size of Boston. And so, that's Kendall County. People always say, well, where is it? I don't know, but to me it resembles Milwaukee quite a bit.
But you had a map, right?
Yes, Jonathan got me a map.
With the streets and everything.
Yes,
right?
yes, and I've had to refer to that map quite often over the years. So.
And so, how do you think that your characters have changed? Like, how has Sandy Stern changed?
To be trite, he's older and wiser. And, he's been through some stuff. The great trauma in his life was the suicide of his first wife. He's also been seasoned by this admitted taste for life among criminals, which he is, as that passage goes on, is smart enough to recognize has to do with the fact that he doesn't have the courage to be a criminal himself. So he does see the raw imagination involved in all this kind of deviation, but he himself stays within the lines. But I hope that as he's aged, he knows more and more about himself.
And how has Kendall County changed? I mean, it can't be the same map on the wall exactly.
No, and it's oddly, I'm about to turn in a draft of a new book, and it's about somebody who's become a refugee from Kendall County. So there are frequent references to the life that he lived there, but he's not there. So I guess you'll have to check in with me in a few more years for a more complete description of how Kendall County has changed.
All right, well, we look forward to it very soon. No, 3 years? That's really?
Well, 2.
Okay, let's hurry, please. So you've done so much for other writers, and we all appreciate it. So at the Authors Guild, you took on Google.
Yes, unsuccessfully, although I live in hope. I think that the Authors Guild sued Google because Google uses snippets of copyrighted works for its Google Books search engine. And if they weren't making money, it would be one thing, but they are. So they're making commercial use out of authors' works and not paying the authors. And that's, by my lights, wrong. And I've waged these struggles, often suggesting that there ought to be a cap so that it's not the best-selling authors who benefit from these, but the authors who are scraping by, who could use, an extra $1,000 a year. And I think that's the right thing to do, and we've just launched the same fight against, the AI companies.
I mean, right, I don't know if you checked this, but I think all of your books are
Yeah.
in
They've been
AI.
scraped. Yeah. And
on the list of.
And it's, I guess it's a compliment, but I'm not crazy about the idea that you can type in, produce a book in the mode of John Grisham, and the computer will spit it out. And John doesn't need more royalties, but he does need respected the fact that he's created this intellectual property, and it's his. It's his.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrible for writers. I mean, using your creativity to enrich.
Yeah,
them.
I really don't mind if they can train this algorithm to, write books or poems that people think are great, then so be it. But don't do it by stealing the voice, and in many ways the mind of other authors. And then, and I think, and it may be just romantic, that you will not replace, the creativity of an individual imagination. I could be completely wrong about this. And if the books that come out of AI in years hence are better than what anybody else is writing, then God bless the machine. But just don't do it by stealing.
Right. I mean, lawyers are worried.
Lawyers should be worried.
Right.
I mean, a lot of what, I did, especially as a younger lawyer, what younger lawyers did for me, the artificial intelligence may be able to do very well. The problem, though, is their first efforts at legal research have been marked by something that you're always afraid that the desperate associate is going to do, which is they made up, when they couldn't find the perfect case, they made it up. And it's cited in the brief.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Guess the computer needs a course in legal ethics.
Right. I know. And fiction has really, in a way, not really caught up with that world. There are not many books, fiction. There's not much fiction about that world.
Yeah. Right? I read a wonderful book, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, about
Zevin, Gabrielle Zevin.
It's just it's a terrific book. Love the novel, and that's about game designers.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So, anything else that you think, like your wisdom? You gave us your four. What is your four things? What are they?
Oh well, I've just over the years, it's my observation that you want to look at people who've succeeded by their own measure in the arts. They've worked hard and they've got some talent, but they've persevered. I mean, they've been knocked down and they've gotten up because, Amy Tan is exceptional. She started publishing immediately. But for the most part, as my friend Tom Zigel puts it, you've got to log a lot of pages. And then when you're talking about you know, the kind of success I had with Presumed Innocent, you just got to be lucky. You've got to be in the right place and, you know, standing there when the meteor hits.
It's interesting, but you're also sensitive to the media. I mean, you hit it right when like court TV was
Yeah.
emerging, and there was a real interest in.
Right. I would love to take credit, of course, for having, you know, recognized all of that. But I was much more like Dom Perignon, who, you know, invented champagne by accident and then took a drink and fell down the stairs.
No, I think fiction writers have a special radar. I think you have a special radar for feeling what's happening in the culture and internalizing it.
Well, I hope we're all engaged in being sensitive to what's going on in the culture. You know, we obviously all recognize certain gross trends right now, and I think any thinking person is frightened to death right at the moment. But and that's unavoidable.
Yeah, I mean, because fiction is sort of all about the gray, but the law seems very like.
Well, one of the great fictions of the law is that these situations are not actually ambiguous. They are ambiguous, and that's why you have dissents in judicial opinions, because there really is another side to the story. But the law pretends, oh no, it's not ambiguous, here's the rule, and follow the rule, and then 20 years later the law changes and goes exactly the opposite way without any looking backward over its shoulder. And I've admired Richard Posner, for the frankness with which he confesses that it's all transitory. You know, we make these rules and then the rules change.
Well, you are Chicago treasure, and
as are you,
treasure
Liz.
you.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, and thank you to Don, who's really just created an amazing effort. And actually, you should really read Don's interview with Scott, because it's worthy of the Paris Review, I swear, his extensive interview.
It was all done, so.
So anyway, so.
Thank you for doing
amazing this for Scott.
And thank you.
I believe I can.